in this episode?
Well, I think when you're in that place, and I wish it would happen more often, I think there's a way to train yourself, and I'll have to work on that. But when it's like flowing, if you will, and things are just working, I really felt like I wasn't involved. I was outside myself, watching myself paint and create art.
Amazing.
And I could enjoy it as a spectator, and it was a unique, wonderful experience.
I'm Cool Gray, and this is Cool Gray in Studio A. Welcome back to the podcast, or if you're joining me for the first time, welcome to the podcast. I know we picked up a number of new subscribers on the YouTube channel as a result of the last episode, episode 19, which was this fantastic conversation with Dr. Melvin Morse about near-death experiences in children. So if you're here because of that and you're back for more, thank you. And I would just encourage you to keep on listening. I will tell you what we're all about here. The Cool Gray in Studio A podcast is all about having interesting conversations with interesting people on a wide variety of topics in hopes of stimulating deeper thought. So even if the episode I'm currently offering you does not sound like something relevant to you or even something you might be interested in, I encourage you to give it a try. Engage your brain, engage your mind, interact. Let me know what's going on. Speaking of letting me know what's going on, I am now on Threads. It's brand new in its babyhood, and I'm an early adopter. It's a great time to join if you haven't already, because the platform isn't oversaturated yet. So it's a great place to discover new accounts and to approach it differently than you would some of the other platforms that are out there. So it's close to Twitter without the vitriol and the overt political agendas. It's really just a place to make connections, have conversations, think text, people, text. Let's talk to each other. Let's start conversations. I am all about it. And so I'll be sharing some things that are a little bit more personal than I usually do on that platform. The way to find it, if you don't already know, is to go to Instagram, and right on my bio, you'll see that there's a temporary ID number for Threads while they're continuing to develop the platform. So why not join me over there? In the meantime, I'm bringing you episode 20 today, and it's a very special one. We're going to be talking to somebody who has been one of my dearest friends on the planet for well over 35 years, Randy Lagana. He's a fantastic artist, and we're going to talk about some very interesting topics. So without further ado, I'm going to take a breath. Yes, a breath. And then I'm going to introduce you to Randy. Stay tuned for my parting thought on the other side of the conversation. Here we go. Randy Lagana was just 6 years old when he drew his first serious piece of art. At age 13, he did his first oil painting and immediately knew that painting was what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. He's been exploring art and how to express himself through art for more than 60 years. Randy paints in acrylics, using brushes, palette knives, sponge, paper, plastic, fingers, or anything else that will get the effect he's looking for. In recent years, he's branched into photography and digital composites, applying those painterly skills to this newer medium. Randy believes that art is a way to see, much like poetry is a way to speak. And he has also been one of my favorite people on the planet and one of my dearest friends for over 35 years. Randy, I am so glad you're here. Thanks for joining me.
Me too, Lynn. Awesome. What a pleasure.
Because I've known you for as long as I have, I happen to know that your life has not always taken the direction that one would necessarily link with an artist type, if you'll pardon the stereotype. And I'm really generalizing here, but I know that you spent some time in Vietnam for one thing, and also working in the prison system. Right. So can you tell me a little bit about how those experiences may have informed or affected your creative side?
Sure. And like a lot of opinions, they've formed over years of living and experiencing life. And 55 years ago today, I landed in Vietnam at the age of 19. A few weeks ago, I had turned 19, and that was an experience for sure. I mean, it sounds like a stupid thing to say.
Yeah, I don't know how anybody comes out of that just feeling passé about it.
Yeah, exactly. I really felt like I gained a lot of gratitude and a perspective on life that men seem to get later in life when they're older and they're facing their mortality and something terrible happens and they get a chance to live again. And now all of a sudden they notice things that they never noticed before.
Right.
The beauty of life and the importance of life shifted. I got that gift at 19. And as I've reflected every year, I've kind of acknowledged that, okay, this is the time that I went off to Vietnam, and it was a life-changing experience. The thing I get mostly is gratitude. And I'm grateful that I survived that experience and I got to continue living to not just create art, which I've always wanted to do, paintings and photography in whatever form, but I also got to create a family, which is one of the greatest creations I've ever made.
Sure.
I have children and grandchildren that wouldn't have existed had I not survived that. So the primary gift, I think, was gratitude.
Was your art in any way influenced by that experience? Did you notice changes in your choice of subject matter or technique?
The thing that immediately comes to mind, not so much about technique, but I had an opportunity when I had an artist friend. I said, I want to do book cover art. And he said, there's a guy living in your town. He says, you should connect with him. His name's Michael Whalen. And so I met Michael. We connected. He said, I'll help you develop a portfolio for a career in illustration and book cover work. And so he gave me a book to read called Study War No More. And it was an anthology. It was a collection of short stories. And so I did a cover for that portrayed a combatant sitting in this wooden chair in a desolate desert kind of scene with a nuclear cloud in the background.
Mm.
And I had that painting and 3 others, went to my first convention, and I sold that painting immediately. And Michael had said to me, he said, something you feel strongly, emotionally about, that subject matter, it just comes through in the painting. So I was, this was 1983, so Vietnam was still a little bit in the distance, but with me, I carry it, and not right here all the time in front of me, but
it's part of you. Yeah.
It's a big part of me.
Yeah, it's in your DNA now.
That stuck with me. So something you feel strongly about is going to come through in the painting. Can't help it. It's just going to come out.
Yeah, I think that's true of any creative expression. If you're expressing yourself creatively, it's coming from the core of your being. If you're doing it right, in my opinion.
Well, and the other thing I learned over time, through various artist friends, that people, you make a sale based on an emotional connection. You may not have it in the art, or it may not be the same one, but people see something, they connect emotionally, and that's when the sale happens.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're that person, it looks like you're the emerging next great artist, and then people may invest in your art and have, not an emotional connection other than they see an opportunity where they might make money.
Yeah, an investment connection.
I've been pretty aware that that's not my path. I'm not the one that's going to be the next great artist that somebody's going to want to invest in. So people buy my art for an emotional reason. And that's satisfying to me, very satisfying.
And actually, you said that was in 1983 when you connected with Michael Whalen. And it was just a few years after that I met you for the first time at a convention. Michael Whalen, for those who don't know, is a very, very well-established and well-known artist in the science fiction fantasy genre. Was your connection with Michael how you became interested in that genre, the science fiction fantasy genre, or had you already been interested in that area of literature?
Well, I had that artist friend of mine, that suggested I connect with Michael. He did romance book covers. His name was Harry Bennett, wonderful man, wonderful artist. And I had another connection there, Bob Crowfoot, and he was in the Western side of things. And they both had kind of the same complaint that after a while they were painting the same damn thing over and over again. And I thought, well, I think maybe I'll do science fiction and fantasy. If I'm painting a dragon over and over, it won't be the same dragon. It could be quite varied. So I just thought, I'll have more interest. And Michael was the perfect connection for that.
Have you become a bigger fan of the genre since you started working in that area?
Oh, I started reading more just because I was around it. And I've enjoyed it. I don't know where I heard this, but somebody said, science fiction is the literature of ideas. And I can't disagree with that because, it explores things that other genres don't necessarily get to do.
Anything's possible.
It's funny how it's poo-pooed a bit, science fiction. They think of the bug-eyed monsters and, green men and that sort of thing. So people, But yet,
well, and that is definitely a part of it. It's just not all of it. So if you know, you know.
Isaac Asimov explored some social topics through science fiction that you can't get a fresh look at. The thought of a robot killing somebody, and what does that mean? Is that really a crime? And all the social implications.
I mean, we're all starting to worry about what's going to happen with AI, and Isaac was worrying about that years and years ago before any of the rest of us were.
And AI, that subject in art, is controversial at the moment.
It is, because now we have AI making our art for us, and I don't know. I don't know if that's a good thing.
Well, I just saw something where they used this program, and I think it was kind of an ad for an AI program, and it was all Mickey Mouse stuff, very, very dark.
The dark side of Disney.
Well, it was more like a Mickey Mouse Gotham City kind of thing. It was always dark and rainy, and yet there were 4 or 5 images, and I thought, I wonder what Disney thinks about this, because they're very protective.
Yes, their corporate image.
And yet, AI is out there. It doesn't create. It's grabbing images from somewhere and mashing things together. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
It raises a whole new bailiwick of issues: legal, intellectual property, artistic expression, and what that does for those of us who are making our art in a painstaking way. If it can be, quote, done better or faster or cheaper using AI, where does that leave us?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. I hope not, but maybe one day it'll be somebody's job at the publishing house to sit there. Okay, here's the next book title. And they'll take the AI program and put it together, and that guy will be making whatever an hour, and that'll be that.
Until AI becomes sentient enough and it starts demanding top dollar, and then we're back at square one.
Oh yeah, when Skynet falls, baby,
right,
we're going to be in trouble.
For sure. Let's shift gears for a second and talk about well, I know that you're largely self-taught, but I know you've had some mentors along the way. We were talking before I pressed record about a mentor who was teaching you some watercolor. And I know that you've taken some online courses, and you've really made it your business to hone your skills and learn new techniques. Tell me a little bit about how that works in your life.
Well, let me just back up and say this a bit. One, my parents lived through the Depression and World War II. So security for them was, an important thing. And I wanted to do art for a living from when I was a kid. And I think somewhere I got the message from my dad: security, security, security. So because I'm addicted to food and living indoors, I gravitated to a regular day job, but still wanted to do art. So I became a police officer, like my dad, when I got out of the military. And I was working in this town where I met these guys who were artists. Harry Bennett, one of them, and then my friend Jack Grasso, who was a wonderful man. He was, my friend and mentor and surrogate dad. It took me in like I was one of his kids. It was fantastic. And I said to him, Jack, I want to be able to do just one decent watercolor. It's a tough medium for me, given the way I approach things. I don't necessarily know where I'm going exactly, and I wander around pushing paint around till I get there. Watercolor, you can't quite do that. But I worked with Jack for a couple of years and was able to produce a decent watercolor, and I still, on occasion, will do one just to see if I can, for the most part, challenge myself.
How does that go?
Sometimes I tear up a lot of them and then, try again.
Well, now I want a Randy Lagana watercolor. It's obviously a rare thing.
For you, anything, Lynn.
I had another guest on that is a mutual friend of ours, another artist in the same genre that I met at conventions, Pat Lewis. And she and I talked, and we were talking about her art. Both of you almost always have a human figure in your paintings, especially the ones that are for book covers and that kind of thing. And I know that that is one of the toughest compositional things to get right, and your human figures are always very beautiful and satisfying to look at. How much of that do you attribute to natural talent, and how much of that did you painstakingly work on in order to develop?
No, I worked hard at it. I took a lot of lessons from various people. Michael certainly had a lot to offer, and then I read a lot. And if I can draw and paint the human figure, that's going to be the toughest thing to do. And then I will, I just had to take that challenge and be able to do that accurately. And like I said, read books like Andrew Loomis has some great books on figure drawing and with some great tips about how to get the proportions right, and just kept at it.
It's not been about just sitting down at the easel and just letting your thoughts flow. You've taken a very serious interest in cultivating skill and technique and really mastering your passion. And I imagine that wasn't just for professional reasons. It seems to really come from a deep desire to be able to express yourself more fully.
Yes, there's so many answers in there, Lynn. I guess and, we can.
That wasn't even really a question. It was more of a statement. That's my observation.
Well, but your observation makes me think about all the other factors and reasons for doing it, and I said we could get Freudian. It was one place I found approval from my dad. If we want to go about fathers and sons sort of thing. So my artwork was something he would show his friends. I wish he had said to me, Randy, you're really good at this. No, it didn't happen like that.
Well, but it happened in that other way, and that's not nothing.
But it happened in that other way, and I thought, oh, he values this. So then I valued it more because it was the one place I got approval from him. So
interesting.
I kept wanting to be good at it, and I enjoyed it. It was a place to, get lost, and it again also therapeutic in the doing of,
Yeah, I was reading, you sent me another interview that you'd done with a blogger several years ago. And in that interview, you said that there was an altered state of consciousness that took place while you were sitting there painting, and that was a very pleasant thing to just really go into your mind and your soul.
Well, I think when you're in that place, and I wish it would happen more often, I think there's a way to train yourself, and I'll have to work on that. But when it's like flowing, if you will, and things are just working, I really felt like I wasn't involved. I was outside myself, watching myself paint and create art.
Amazing.
And I could enjoy it as a spectator, and it was a unique, wonderful experience. If you've had the experience, you'll know what I mean. But just to be disconnected yet connected.
That's very cosmically satisfying.
Well, I think getting that conscious part out of you, because when you're trying to solve a problem consciously with the frontal lobe of your brain, you can almost never get anywhere because
it's almost an obstacle, your own brain. Yeah.
You need to kind of let go and trust that your subconscious mind can handle the problem no matter what it is. And it works out.
I imagine that also, that kind of separating yourself from too much conscious thought. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase the question. When we did your little intro, we were talking about all the various things that you'd want to have at hand to grab. So, when you have an idea and you want to create something, is it going to be a brush? Is it going to be a palette knife? Is it going to be your fingers? So I imagine there's definitely some conscious thought process that goes into that. That's a little more nuts and bolts. But at the same time, it's got to come from the soul somewhere. It's like, this is what I need to get this idea out of me and onto the canvas.
People always want to ask, where do your ideas come from?
Don't you hate that question?
Well, it does make me think sometimes. There isn't one specific answer, because sometimes I could be anywhere, and stuff is, constantly bombarding you on a subconscious level. You're not even aware of consciously what you're reacting to or what you're experiencing. But sometimes I'll just see a color combination. Oh, I like that. I want to do a painting with those colors. And that's the idea for a painting. I'm going to do something with those colors. Right. Now it's like, oh, what's the subject matter going to be? It might just be an abstract painting, and they're a different way of painting.
And it'd be something entirely different if you've been hired to create a work for, say, a book cover. Then it's got to be relevant to that. So that's informed by in a whole different process.
Right. Then for a book cover, you're reading. You're trying to capture the idea of the book and generate interest that people will want to then read the book. A different approach. But
you've painted in a lot of different genres, so it's been like the fantasy, it's been surrealism, it's been abstract, and then different mediums, acrylics and watercolors and photography, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so does the idea come, I want to work in this medium, so I'm going to create something that will be served by this technique, or how does it all get from the spark of the idea to reality?
Sometimes I might think, okay, the subject matter, acrylics will lend itself best to this subject matter. But quite often, I just need to switch things up for me to keep it interesting. Like, okay, I've painted on canvas wall. I want to do something different, so I'll paint on masonite because it's just a different feel, and it just makes it interesting. Or I painted large, and now I'm going to paint small, and pretty much I paint in acrylics. I thought about, oh, maybe I used to paint in oils a long time ago. I thought maybe it's time I paint in oils again. Quite frankly, it's more fuss than I want to deal with. So I'm like, maybe not. I just want to make art for as long as I possibly can. My friend Jack Grasso, later in life, he had macular eye degeneration. I got to the point where he couldn't paint anymore. And nobody knows that stuff is coming. So I'm like, well, I can. I want to make all the art I possibly can.
We're both getting a little older than we were when we first met over 35 years ago. And I know it's harder to see in low light. It's harder to, sit still for long periods of time. So we better hurry up and make that art, right?
Yeah, what's wrong with my glasses? They're not working anymore.
Stupid glasses.
These can't see up close, can't see far away. Yeah, it's a little more challenging as we get older.
Mm-hmm. So that's actually kind of almost a natural segue into the extension of our eyes can very often be the camera lens. And I know that photography has always been a tool that you've used. I know a lot of artists will use photography to take reference photos to help with their painting process, but you actually have used photography as a medium, an end in and of itself over the years. And that's been evolving kind of side by side, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. I'm not somebody who takes a comment lightly. It all goes in there and it incubates and swirls around for a while, and I think about it. And as you point out, artists use photography for reference photos, and that's how I was using it. And then one day a friend said, oh, have you ever thought about the photography being the end product, the final art? So that rattled around in my brain for a while. And I said, oh, that's an interesting idea. And I used to have a dark room. I said, I'm going to try shooting with that intent. And so I did. And I said, I like this. I'm going to set up my dark room again. I started shooting.
Hey, let me just interrupt you for a second and say for the listening audience that's a lot younger than us, dark rooms used to be where you took the actual film out of the camera and processed it with chemicals in order to get a photograph.
Right.
That's like such ancient history now.
Along those lines, I was very grateful when the digital darkroom came around because my darkroom habits weren't very good. So, but with the photography, I said, okay, I'm gonna do this as art. And I casually said to my wife, I have this idea. I want to shoot nude photos of our friends. And I says, maybe I can turn it into a book because they've never posed before. They're not professional models. I'm not a professional. And she's, oh, let's ask them. And I'm like, humana, what? We can't do that.
Had you worked with nude models before, or was this how you went into that area?
My experience with nude models was in the life drawing class of art.
Drawing, not photography.
That was it, not photography.
Mm-hmm.
And so asked some friends. They were wonderful and said yes, almost all of them. Then came the caveats. Oh, well, I want to lose 10 pounds first. I broke my nose when I was a kid, so no profile shots. I have stretch marks on my thighs, so no frontal shots. I'm like, oh my God, how are we going to do this? Everybody's going to be with a burlap bag over them. But once we got, in that setting, and I was nervous. I'd never directed anybody in how to pose. So what I did is I sketched things out beforehand because that was my comfort zone. I could draw out an idea.
Sure.
So instead of saying, do this, put your arm here, I would say, hold up a sketch. Can you do this? And everybody relaxed after a while. Then you realize it's just not to minimize the human form and its beauty and uniqueness in nature. It could have been a bowl of fruit, a lump of coal, it was just.
And yet so much more, because the nude, male and female, particularly female, is a classically popular subject matter. It's been around since the beginning of art. And it continues to be something that we find tremendous beauty in. Was that the motive when you said to yourself, hey, if I'm going to make art with photography, the first thought that you expressed to me was that you wanted to take nude portraits of friends? That's a very intimate thing. And it's a very interesting place to begin. Where did that come from in you?
I don't know. Like I said, it was this idea, and luckily, Jen, most supportive person I've ever had in my life, said, "Let's do this thing." I think if I did not have her for that support, I could have never carried through. Maybe, but I kind of doubt it, knowing me. And my thought in it was, these are ordinary people. They're just our friends. I thought, I want to show that we all have beauty. I see it everywhere. People quite often have trouble seeing it in themselves. We're always deferring to some image of beauty that
Right.
the ad guys have said, this is
what beauty is.
The epitome of beauty.
Yeah.
And in the 60s, it was Twiggy. And then, and then you fast forward and it's the Kardashians, who have a much different shape than Twiggy. But I was hoping to reveal that we all have beauty and to try to accept how we are. We're all different, but I think we all have beauty. And I wanted to shoot nudes because I think that's where the truth is. Because we can dress in a certain way. I'm sure in preparation for the podcast here, you thought about what you were going to wear,
yep,
how your hair would look.
Yep.
We want to present a certain image. You go to a job interview, you don't go in jeans and a t-shirt, well, maybe depending on the job, but most likely you would not do that. So I think without our clothes on is the most truthful we can be. And if you can accept all that truth, well, that's a good place to be.
Mm-hmm.
We have so much stuff about body image today.
So true. Did you ever have an opportunity to show that collection at a gallery or a show anywhere?
But I started bringing them to the science fiction fantasy conventions. At one of those conventions, and I think Lee Grossman.
Sure.
Lee approached me and says, I think we could publish this and make it a book. And I thought, then maybe I did have a decent idea. And then life got in the way for both of us, and it didn't happen.
Well, you took that idea though, and you branched out into a couple of other areas. I know that as you developed the expression through photography and nude photography, you started to hire some models. You worked with some people. There was the series you did that was just certain portions of the body, but not the entire body.
Yeah.
There was the series that you did that, I don't even know if bondage is the correct word, but the ropes and it was almost acrobatic in nature. What is that technique called? There's a name for it, right?
Oh, shibari. You're talking about the
shibari. Yeah. Tell me what that is.
Well, it's a Japanese art form. Of course, the Japanese can take anything and make it an art form. They have a gift for that. And I have a nephew who got into it to the point where he's actually teaching other people how to tie.
And it's for purposes of creating a beautiful pose, or is it for some other, is it meant to be erotic, or?
I think it's all those things. It's art. Certainly the person doing the tying, it's about creating art in a unique way. And the first time I saw it, I'm talking to the young woman who had been tied. I'm like, because I have trouble in an MRI now. I'm a little claustrophobic. I said, that makes me twitch just seeing it. She's, because it's comforting. And I think it's that little bit of being bound and tight. It's like, I don't want to call it a hug.
Like being swaddled in a way.
Comforting, swaddled. Yes, that's the word. That's the one.
And so because we don't have a visual here to show anybody, it isn't like what we would think mostly in Western culture of what bondage is. It isn't like binding and gagging. It's a very artistic way. There are very creative, almost acrobatic poses that they're sort of suspended in space with these artistic forms of big, heavy coils of rope. And it's very beautiful. Maybe I'll get you to send me one of those images that I can put in the blog that'll go along with this, because I thought that was a fascinating series. So you've developed that over time and started working with models. Is that a different process?
Well, the one thing I want to add about the ropes and that sort of stuff is, to me, it adds some depth and volume. When you're wrapping those things around the figure, you get that there's depth in it. It's less flat. It's just some interest because it's a little unexpected and creates a little bit of tension. Mm-hmm. It did for me, just like, ooh.
You might not be sure how to feel about what you're saying. And
I'm a little uneasy, and always kind of looking for an emotional response in art. Mm-hmm. If somebody just says, oh, interesting, it's about the worst thing you could say. If you say, oh, I hate this thing, okay, that's a strong emotional reaction.
Yeah.
I can take that.
So working with models, you were doing a lot of black and white work. All those series that we've talked about until now were largely black and white, as I recall. And I know I'm
Yeah.
talking about things that the listening audience hasn't seen, and I'll try
Mhm.
to give a sampling of that work,
Yeah.
and also direct people to your website if they want to look at what we're talking about here. But then you started doing some color work, and you started using some outdoor locations, waterfalls and rock cliffs and abandoned buildings, unexpected places where you would find a nude model. So that's taking it in another direction. I'd love to hear a little bit about what that experience was like for you and for your model.
Again, all this stuff in some ways is empowering. I tell people, so if you want to do something that's scary, ask somebody to pose nude for you, somebody you don't know. Go up to a stranger. I had a hard time with my friends, but at least they
In a
know
way,
me.
I think it would be harder with friends because they're not professionals. Somebody who is a model might be more accustomed to receiving requests like that, I would think. No?
Yes, it's a business transaction.
Mm-hmm.
So, but at least I thought with my friends, they know me and they trust me and they know that my interest isn't,
It's not nefarious. Yeah.
it's not nefarious. I'm seeking to make art, and they
Right.
know that about me and trust me.
Right.
But having done that and put themselves in a very vulnerable position, I felt the trust even more, and it was almost overwhelming.
So you're saying it kind of deepened the friendship, the already existing friendship. It didn't make it awkward or difficult afterward.
Yeah. But then when we move away from friends, when I'm asking somebody I don't know, if I approach a woman who I think is an interesting look and say, hey, would you be interested in posing nude for me? I'm an artist. If they take it wrong and they think I'm asking something else, may I get my face slapped. But if it's a guy, I could get hurt.
Yeah.
And truthfully, you know me, Lynn. I don't want to offend anybody ever.
You might be the gentlest man I've ever met in my life, Randy.
Well, and I hope that comes across.
And so with these models recently, you've done, I want to come back to the locations that you've been choosing.
Oh, yeah. Sorry,
Yeah,
I want off on you.
That's okay. That's what artists do. It's perfectly acceptable. But I want to bring it back around because some of those, especially the abandoned buildings photos, that's the last place in the world you expect to see a nude woman. And they're very, very striking images that I've seen you post both in color and in black and white. And yes. It's two very different emotional responses when you look at them in those ways. I just want to hear a little more about what's going on in you as an artist when making those images.
Okay. One, shooting in an abandoned building is not a unique or original idea on my part. It's a popular location for this type of work. But I think for me, when it's that juxtaposition, you don't expect it.
Mm-hmm.
But also there's something about old buildings that are decaying and falling down. They were full of life at one point, and now they're past their prime and declining into oblivion. And to have a nude figure there, which is so representative of life to me, I think it makes us think about this is the human form as well. Here it is full of life and energetic, and yet like the buildings will fall into decay and disappear from this existence. But we will get to go on to something else. I don't know about the building, but my personal belief, I think you share it. Yes. We'll move on to some other realm.
Energy doesn't begin or end. It's eternal.
Well, and for me, I shot in two abandoned places. One of them happened to be an abandoned Nike missile site in Connecticut. It was abandoned in the 60s.
Wow.
And I started searching. My nephew was a Shibari. He knew of this place. That's how I got there. But I started looking into it, and there were like 12 different sites just in Connecticut, which is a tiny little state. Uh-huh. And there were a bunch of them here in California. And I thought, oh, how interesting is that? A place that was prepared for death and destruction, and we're going to,
bring life to it.
Bring life to it in a different way.
Wow. And so you also did some photography in beautiful outdoor areas where I imagine that these were not necessarily isolated areas. how did you work that out so that you weren't disturbed and that there were, you weren't upsetting anybody else?
I think I know the one where the model did a lot of yoga in front of
Yes,
the.
that's the one.
That was her location, Bash Bish Falls in State Park in Massachusetts.
It was a state park.
Yeah, just across the line.
Wow.
He says, well, we planned to get there early. We got there, arrived around 7 o'clock, and we hiked in. So it was around 7:30 when we started our shoot, and there was pretty much nobody there. But occasionally, Laura, that was my model at that, she'd said, oh, there's somebody up there hiking on the edge. But she didn't care, and the guy's like, whatever, he's hiking. He's like, oh, somebody's doing a shoot, and they move on. And we had a family hike down. And I just go over and say, hey, just so you know, we're doing a nude shoot over here. And they had young kids. And I go, okay, well, we'll be over here. And, it was respectful.
You didn't run afoul of any rangers or anything like that?
No, we didn't. No, none of that. And I'm not sure what their response would be. We were nature in nature. So.
Right. There probably wasn't a specific rule against that in their handbook. And so that is a beautiful segue into the next layer. And I think the most recent way that you've been expressing yourself, and that is to take both your paintings and your photography and then bring those into a digital environment where you've been doing some composite work, which is fascinating. I've tried to dabble in it here and there, but because I haven't taken the time or put in the effort that you have to actually learn how to do it, my results are not worth even discussing. But I would love to know how you ended up moving into that area.
Photography and the photo compositing are much more immediate. Not that the compositing does, it can take a long time. You can have layers and layers and get as involved as you would like to be. But I could see the results pretty quickly. And I enjoyed that. And it was also just something different. I like to keep it interesting for me. I somehow came across this course, I think when we were visiting California, and I signed up for it. And they were teaching us stuff about Photoshop. And I just learned some techniques that I didn't even know existed about blending things.
Yeah.
I had started on my own, but I was putting two images together and I was erasing the parts I didn't want. And I learned about masks. So you could take stuff away, but you can get it back if you went too far. And the things I learned about art certainly apply to photography and the digital composition itself, composing something and having the subject matter in the right place in your format. And color and all that other stuff comes into play.
And how do you make those works available if you're interested in showing those or selling those? Are you printing giclées, or how are you bringing those into the physical world?
Printing giclées, because there is no original. That's the weird thing about that digital art. In paintings, you have the original painting and you can also have prints. But the digital work is different in that there isn't one original piece.
Right.
So those are all in print form, which I'm in a gallery here in California now, and I've sold some of those. Always nice when that work sells as well.
And I'm going to show in the blog that goes along with this episode, there's one particular piece I saw on your website that I loved. That was actually a gift for your granddaughter that involves both painting, photography, and these digital composite techniques in one painting. And it's the one, just for listeners, it's the one with the tiger, with a little girl reading a book on a tiger. And that was very personal to you, but it's a really beautiful blending of all of the things that are you. And a great expression of your love and people that you love brought all together in one piece.
Well, and I was creating a piece that was about her. So I took her interest and some of my own. She likes animals, but she likes reading. She's a voracious reader. And so I incorporated those things, and she likes fantasy. And I include my paintings in the piece. And there's a painting of her mother in it, who also loves animals and loves wolves. So very fun to do, very personal.
What a loving gift.
It's a nice way to make unique gifts because I can tailor it to somebody. When people meet me and they're like, oh, you're an artist? And do you do commissions? And I'm already bracing myself because I know what's going to happen next. They're going to ask me if would I do a portrait of their husband and their baby or something, which I'm not against. but I think doing portraits is a special, unique talent. I can paint, but when you do a portrait, someone they want to look their absolute best and yet look like them. And that I think is a real gift of a portrait artist. And we did recently move to California about 2 years ago. And when we came out here, I thought, I'm going to try new things here. So I started painting portraits, but I thought, I'm going to make it less intimidating for me, and I'm going to use unexpected colors and not actual flesh tone. And I did them without any drawing, just started painting into the canvas. And it's been a nice challenge. It's been successful.
Those portraits didn't start with a sketch. You just started applying paint to the canvas.
Yeah.
Wow, Randy.
I get to the point where when I'm doing a painting and I want it to be one stroke. Okay, we're done. I got it. I nailed it. Everything is precious, and I don't want to cover it over. But when I went to this painting class, I said, I'm just going to do things differently, and I'm not going to worry about okay, I didn't get it right the first time, and I'm going to be willing to cover over something with paint that I feel is good, but it's not right. The proportions are off, so let's just correct it, cover it over. I'll cover it over completely if I have to. It never feels good. You feel like, oh, I wasted time.
No, but it's a good exercise in growth.
It is, and we don't always get things right the first time. Said the guy who's been married 3 times.
I know you definitely got it right the third time, because I've known Jen as long as I've known you almost, and she's definitely a keeper. But as a writer, I can tell you the same thing. I used to have a very hard time getting my first draft was my finished product until I experienced having a good editor for the first time. Yes. And it was almost like having surgery done on your newborn until I saw how much better it could be. And then the rewriting process, it actually freed me up. If I went into a new story knowing that this was my first pass, I could just get the ideas on paper and not worry about form, and then come back and do another layer and just refine it each time. And it was a whole new learning process. And I know that my writing got exponentially better. So congratulations on your portrait experience.
And sometimes you have to sit with things. That model that came here and I photographed here, I took one of the photos and I did a portrait of her from it. And I framed it and I hung it up. A week or so later, I'm looking at the painting and I'm looking at it and I'm like, something's not quite right. I took the photo I worked from, I looked at the painting, and I'm like, ooh, this is off a little bit here. The cheek's a little too wide. The eyes are need to be tipped a little bit. They're not at the right angle, and the mouth needs to be changed. And I'm like, okay, I'll fix it. It looks fine. If you don't know her, you look at it, it's like, okay, yeah, that's a human being. That's a face.
Just not her face.
Yeah. So I'm going to fix that. But I couldn't see it right away. When I got to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm done with the painting. This works great. And then I got away from it a little bit, got a fresh look, and said, nope, it's a little off.
Well, and sometimes the consumer as well, getting that feedback that you were talking about earlier, people saying I love it or hate it, and here's why. Or somebody will say, why did you choose that color? Or what did you do that for? That can be a good thing or a bad thing, but it's an educational thing no matter how you slice it.
Well, and I think as an artist, and I was always struggling for, I wanted approval, so I couldn't feel good about something until somebody else said, okay, this is good, Randy. Well, you know what? We all have different tastes. I need to satisfy me. Mm-hmm. And when I'm painting for me first. If somebody else finds the painting wonderful, great, that's a bonus. But I need it to be good for me, and I need it to satisfy me. And I like things a certain way. And I certainly have seen this in photography. I'm on a number of sites where photographers come together and they show their work. And I realized that some people like their images darker. Some like them really contrasty. Doesn't make one better than the other. It's just a personal preference. And it's taken me a long time to get to the point where I could accept my work as it is and quit comparing it to somebody else's. When
you're talking about wanting approval and wanting to satisfy yourself, those worlds kind of come together in this day and age on social media. And even though we've been having a lovely conversation up until now, I'm going to push a button here by saying, I know, especially with your nude photography, which is such a beautiful area of work that you do, that you've run into a lot of frustration, you and other artists that work with nude subject matters, trying to show your work and gain audience using social media, which is how it's done today, and dealing with the restrictions that come along with being particularly on places like Facebook and Instagram. I'm told that Twitter doesn't care if you post nudes, but who was looking at images on Twitter anyway? Talk to me a little bit about that experience, because I know you've been frustrated there.
Yeah. And well, you mentioned Twitter, and yes, certainly you can post whatever you want, but you get more than you want sometimes. I mean, it's everything. You're like, wow, okay, so I have my work there, but it's with all this other stuff, and you don't want it to be judged by that either.
Sure.
Instagram for sure is notorious for their community guidelines and trying to protect the community from what, I'm not sure, but this is a hot button for me and for a lot of artists these days. They're accepting of art, but then you realize, maybe I should have read the guidelines more carefully. I had posted this image it's a nude backside, kind of close up, and there's a red gauzy material draped over her one arm. That got removed. Apparently butts are okay, but it can't be close up.
Okay. Don't understand that.
The variables are mind-boggling. Instagram, just after a while, you can't show any genitalia, of course. You can't show female breasts. Male breasts are fine.
Which is the same out on the street.
Which, for me as an artist, I'm like, wow, you're just you're censoring the art, and that's annoying. But I think, as I mentioned to you, that there's a growing group that are like concerned about they're really restricting the female form and what women get to how they get to express themselves in a societal way, that we're really restricting women and women's bodies. Men can pretty much, they can show genitalia, but they can show their breasts and they can be topless somewhere.
Well, and in the context of social media, especially in the context of art, there doesn't seem to be any distinction between what is legitimate artistic expression and what is pornography. And the fact that we're lumping them all together, I think does a great disservice to us as human beings. I think you and I were talking before I pressed record about a school recently here in Florida where teachers now are required to inform parents 2 weeks notice they are required to give when they plan to teach something, quote, potentially objectionable. And the reason that happened was because a teacher displayed a photograph of the statue of David, and one parent, complained that this was pornographic and that their child was traumatized by having been exposed to this image, and they wish they had been told ahead of time. I don't remember that level of nonsense even existing when I was going to school.
Well, traumatized. This is crazy. One of the infamous halftime Super Bowl show with Janet Jackson and Timberlake. Some guy talked about his 11-year-old saw that and was going to be traumatized. I'm like, please. We have the wrong attitude. We seriously do. In film, we can do horrible things to women, beat them up, vivisect them, whatever. That's fine. Show pubic hair, please. Total outcry from the public. Shut that movie house down. We can't have that kind of filth.
And that's the greater issue. But the fact that we're not making a distinction when we're talking about art, and you could argue that film, these things that are being depicted on film, is also an artistic expression, but it's almost, if you're watching any streaming television, if you're watching a Hulu original, an Amazon original, or a Netflix original, it's almost required now that there are scenes that are borderline pornographic, in my view, that they're gratuitously added now just because it's possible, where it didn't used to be possible on broadcast television. And the exact opposite seems to be happening on social media, where you have artists such as yourself you're not trying to be provocative in a sexually ambiguous way. You're not trying to create pornography. You're trying to create art, and there's no distinction being made on social media at all. And here's your beautiful piece of art, and you have to put little X marks through nipples and through genitalia, which is the only thing I see when I look at those images on it. It's like, what are those X's doing there? I want to see the art,
Yeah. Well, they're a bit of a smudge print. It's something that's just a little jarring to what you're trying to create. So Instagram has its guidelines. Like I said, the butts up close, no, that's not going to work. But if they're in a distance, fine. When Instagram was kind of cracking down, a lot of artists said, oh, there's this other social platform where you won't have that censorship called Vero. I joined Vero, everything is fine. All of a sudden I get a notification they're asking, to their credit, at least they're asking me to remove these posts. They didn't just do it. And I'm like, oh, well, what the heck's wrong with them? Well, it violates our guidelines. I'm looking, you could have bare breasts. There was no issue there on Vero. Fine. But genitalia, no, not going to happen. And no butts, only in profile. If it was turned slightly, no, you had to.
How do you know where that line is? And how do you arrive at that when you're creating those guidelines? And I can understand if you don't want something that is overtly pornographic in nature. You're not going to want to see a woman, on full display like you would see in a men's magazine. But to see a woman standing nude where, you're not really seeing anything objectionable as far as I can determine. I guess I'm using the word objectionable like I'm an authority as well. But I mean,
let me say this. In fairness to Instagram, I get it that it's a social platform where people all walks of life and all over the world can come. And they're scrolling through and out, all of a sudden they've been exposed to something they didn't really want to see.
So allow it to have an age restriction, which you can do with a business account there.
Yeah, I've put that on mine. But I said, how about, and I said this to Vero because they asked me, about my feedback, when they wanted me to remove some posts, I said, I know you have the technical ability and the skill, I'm going to assume. Why can't you, like some other sites, you have an
age
restriction, a warning?
Yeah.
There's not safe for work, but to have an option of creating a warning, and I still get to show my art as I intended. So Vero has said to me something in the works along those lines of what you suggested.
But then again, who's over there on that platform? Are you getting the exposure that you want on Vero? Or is it just artists' echo chamber talking to each other?
It's not the following of Instagram.
Yeah. And I know we're both kind of ranting because we both express ourselves artistically and we're both, aging hippies in one way or another. So it's like, let's everybody be naked for 5 minutes and you'll all calm down,
Nobody's going to die.
Right.
Trust me. Just to go back to it, my friends, when I had them ask them and they participated in this, posing nude, almost every single one of them at the end talked about the freedom they felt and how comfortable they were. When we take breaks, they quit putting a robe on and they just found a comfort and acceptance with,
wow,
because nothing bad happened.
And so now that you're here in California and you have time, I know that you're out and about exploring your environment. And is your art changing as a result?
The portraits, and did them in odd colors. There's a different light here. There's different landscapes, so that's exciting. So a lot of new stuff in that way. Mm-hmm. I haven't done it yet, but I intend to do some plein air painting, which I've never really done before.
You've never done it before?
No, and I want to do that and see how that impacts my art. So I think and there's a lot of art around here. I'm still trying to connect with my art community. I had a group of back east. We used to have a Friday morning breakfast meeting, and we talk about art or just BS in general.
What kind of artistic work, if any, are you looking for at this point? Are you open to more illustration for books or commissioned work from individuals, not airbrush portraits?
I'm interested in commissions. I think I'm at a point in my life I want to do what interests me. If there's something interesting about it, great. I'm not opposed to money, but where I am in life, I have enough. And that's a nice place to be. If I had more money, yes, there's some things I would do. I would hire more models. That's expensive to do that.
Right.
And I would like to explore that more and work with some people that I think are interesting. The book cover work, if something came my way, I don't know how that would happen. Yeah, I would do it, but I'm not seeking it out so much.
More photography? Are you leaning in that direction?
I am. I like the immediacy of it. It's a different medium. I'm enjoying it, and I'm interacting. I'm meeting people. That's another human being, and we're collaborating on creating art. That's a fun process. Nice experience. I want to keep painting. Like I said, I want to do some plein air painting. I want to do some more like collage, found object kind of work.
So you're finding your new rhythm.
Perfect way to put that. Yeah, I'm trying to find a new rhythm.
So what I'm going to do is make some examples of your work. I've asked you for a couple of your images so that I can put them in the blog that I'm going to write that will tell my listening audience a little bit more about our relationship and this conversation, and then give them a chance to sample your work. But I'm also going to point everybody to randylagana.com, and there'll be links in the show notes for how to find you and look at everything you've presented there. And also there are ways to reach out to you directly if anybody's interested in purchasing your work or commissioning you from there. Randy, it is always such a pleasure to have a conversation with you, but this one is going to go down in history as one of my favorite conversations with you. Thank you for making yourself available for this and for sharing
you're welcome.
Your heart.
I enjoyed it so much.
I'd like for you to come back and join me next week. We're talking about an entirely different topic. My guest will be Richard Capriola, and we are going to talk about substance use and abuse in adolescence, a very vulnerable population, and something I'm sure resonates with many of you out there in one level or another. In the meantime, I have a parting thought for you today, and the credit goes to someone named Amy Weatherly. And this is what Amy had to say and what I would like to say to you to wrap up today's episode. Some people could be given an entire field of roses and only see the thorns in it. Others could be given a single weed and only see the wildflower in it. Perception is a key component to gratitude, and gratitude is a key component to joy. And so I'll leave you with that today. And I also want to say thanks for listening. Come on back, and I will see you next time. Cool Gray in Studio A is a fine-tuned services production. It exists for entertainment purposes and is not intended to be used as a sole source of information or advice on any subject. Find and follow this podcast at coolgraystudios.com.